It's my pleasure to introduce Heather. We've worked previously together on trying to get funding for drilling holes into the North Sea to look at the glacial sequence.
Yeah.
Wasn't entirely successful. We did try. That was when you were working for the British Geological Survey, which you don't anymore. However, you seem to have this bizarre working arrangement whereby you live and work in Edinburgh, but your employers are in Australia.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Okay, well, maybe you can
Best both worlds.
You can probably explain that a lot better than I can. I think it's on. Sorry, you probably have to hold it really, really, really close. Perhaps more pertinently to the Edinburgh GeolSoc, Heather is the editor-in-chief of the Scottish Journal of Geology. So if you've got any questions about the journal, then you can ask her.
Yep, please.
In the interim, we have, well, I should just say, actually, thank you for turning up since we lost our other speaker. Almost no notice. You can tell us about some of your actual research, because you never seem to be in the UK, you're always somewhere exotic. So if you can come tell us about what it is you actually do when you're not editing the journal. Thank you very much.
Nope. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Is that coming across okay online? Perfect, excellent, let's plow on. Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction. As Mark was saying, I did over 20 years at the British Geological Survey, and my usual stomping grounds, of course, were the waters round about the UK and the Northeast Atlantic. Much of that time was spent under the guidance of Robert Gatliff in the room there, but more recently, sort of the last 10 years or so, I started travelling a bit more further afield, looking at some of the subduction trenches around the world and some of these other sort of deep water, ultra deep areas of the planet, working across disciplines. And more recently, I was just made an offer by the University of Western Australia, an offer that I couldn't really sort of turn down, to cut the old apron strings and make a leap into academia and sort of more sort of blue skies research. So that happened earlier this year. So I'm kind of here tonight to present a bit of an update. I was lucky enough to present to the Edinburgh GeolSoc back in 2021. And that was a talk about something called the 5 Deeps expedition. And really that was just the sort of precursor, just the sort of little hint at what could be if we decided to actually get some big scale funding and support to properly explore some of these hard to reach and previously unexplored areas. So I'll give you a whistle-stop tour of some of the work that we've been doing since the 5 Deeps, and that work has been funded by Inkfish. And Inkfish is a marine research organisation dedicated to exploring the ocean. And we have a massive programme working across many disciplines. It's very much a team sport. So we've got engineers, biologists, oceanographers, ecologists. And of course, we've got the amazing crews, not only on the good ship Dagon, which was the image in the previous slide there, but we also have, as well as the Open Ocean Program, which I will talk about mostly tonight, we have a dedicated team looking at the sort of coastal zone as well. And I'm happy to answer questions about that afterwards. But for the purposes of tonight, I'll concentrate on the open ocean work. So we have a dedicated team of geologists, geographers, and geomorphologists. And we're not only sort of working, just looking at sort of hardcore geology and the geoscience research, but we're working across all of these different disciplines, sort of really sort of having this holistic look at all of these deep areas of the world. And we're looking at sort of suites of seamounts, like the areas that's flying around in the bottom left corner there. But we're also, these areas haven't been previously mapped using modern technology. And the map in the top left there with the logo Seabed 2030, that is mostly satellite altimetry data. So it's quite coarse resolution. So looking at the top right there, that's the Molokai fracture zone. But whenever you sort of delve deeper, and the devil is in the detail, whenever we start using modern surveying methods, you can start to see all of the intricate detail, and we can start to unpick the evolution of the ocean crust. So, but just sort of keep in mind and keep in the back of your head as we go forward, 74% of the Earth's planet is unmapped using modern techniques. So it's only got this sort of coarse resolution satellite altimetry data, which is incredibly useful depending on the research question that you want to ask. But I always want more. I want the moon on a stick. So I always want a bit more data and a bit more knowledge. So what we have here is a slightly unusual view of our oceans. This is called I think it's called the Spillhouse projection. So we're looking down on Antarctica there. But really what I want to do here is to sort of hammer home that all of our oceans and seas are interconnected. And really, if you want to understand one bit of it, you need to understand it all, really. So the Open Ocean Program is dedicated mostly to looking at the sort of deeper water areas. So mostly things deeper than sort of 3,000–4,000 meters water depth. The black sort of little sort of squiggles and blobs on the right there, those are the hadal zones. So that's everything that's deeper than 6,000 meters. So we're looking at, for those that are sort of tectonically minded, you'll sort of start to recognize that a lot of these hadal zones are situated on some of the tectonic plate boundaries. But we also have these sort of hadal basins that are right in the middle of some of the oceanic plates as well. But as we're sort of transiting between all of these ultra deep areas, we also want to take advantage of the fact that we've got a ship that is perfectly capable, and there's lots of really interesting research questions to look at as we're crossing these vast abyssal plains. So we're just collecting data everywhere we go. We turn that into a major expedition to look at. But so why go deep? But over 50% of the ocean is deeper than 4,000 meters. That's for those, sometimes it can get a little bit abstract. 4,000 meters is twice the length of the Royal Mile. So, you know, just a little bit short of one lap of Arthur's Seat if you're sort of out for a run in the evenings or in the mornings. And here we have the blue planet. So this is the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is about 6 times the size of Australia, just sort of putting that in for my new employers there, you know. But something to get your head around is, you know, this area is so vast, so how can we possibly sample elements of the largest ecosystem that will give us enough scientific robustness to start to say something meaningful about what is going on in the system? So, and I think, you know, that is kind of one of the reasons that I'm so excited, and that's why I made the leap from the BGS. You know, it's something that really sort of gets me going, you know, about how, you know, we can work with a research team that we're just trying to work on a scale much bigger than any one nation could ever fund, really. And we're lucky enough to have the ability to do that. So what do we have access to at the minute to undertake our research? We've got Dagon, which is our vessel. It used to be called Pressure Drop. So I think in my previous talk, I talked a lot about Pressure Drop. It's got a sort of a lick of paint and a new name. And it is the workhorse of our program, and we use that to acquire multi-beam X-sounder data. So we go out and we effectively mow the lawn, and we manage to get robust data with high confidence in the data quality of the seafloor. So we're looking at the seascape. So much like a lot of our colleagues work on land, and they're looking at the landscape and creating digital elevation models to investigate sort of various geological factors and features. We're doing exactly the same offshore. On top of that, we have scientific landers, and they work completely autonomous, so separate from the vessel. We sort of launch them off. They descend under their own weight to the seafloor. Uh-oh.
Just get rid of that part.
And we basically cram as many scientific instruments as possible onto those landers. So we're recording geological information. We've got sensors on there to record the properties of the water column. We take samples of the water as well. So we've got experts in eDNA, for environmental DNA, for example, as well, working with us. We've got video traps, and we've got other landers in development. So we work with engineers as well. So we're not just working with what we have just now, but we're thinking about the future and what sort of technology that we might want to develop as a group, as a collective, to further our and improve upon our scientific capabilities. The green vehicle in the bottom is the sub Bacanawa. I think in my previous talk, it used to be called limiting factor. but it's been renamed. And that carries 2 people down to the seafloor. And what we're now using that submersible to do is to undertake sort of these transects, these long transects of the seafloor, and collecting video data around there. We can also turn that video data into 3D models as well. So, you know, you're effectively, you know, it's like looking at a cliff section on land. We're sort of standing there looking at all of these amazing geological features, the strata and the formations cropping out in the seafloor, and able to really sort of use that for robust scientific investigation. So we're using all those together, not just for our own sort of nefarious purposes, but we're working with lots of other different disciplines as well. So when you're sort of bobbing around on Bacanawa, you know, and you're sort of looking out into the abyss is also sometimes looking back at you. That's photos actually taken out of the viewport of the submersible, just on a little camera phone. These are oceanic white-tip sharks, critically endangered species. But just sort of whiz through where we've been so far. So between June last year and October, we undertook 3 big expeditions. There's a Trans-Pacific Transit, and that comprised 6 legs, Nova Canton, which was 4 legs, and the Tonga Trench, which just finished in October there. I'll talk primarily about the Trans-Pacific Transit and Nova Canton. I've got a couple of little images from Tonga, but we're only just back from there. And I mainly just put in a couple of those for Bob. And upcoming, I mean, we're not stopping, we're keeping on going. So in fact, a number of our colleagues have already just flown out to Chile to join Dagon to go down to the South Orkney Trench, so down into the Southern Ocean. I'm flying out just after New Year to relieve with another group of scientists to relieve that lot and go back down. After that, we've got a trip to the Falklands outer continental shelf and escarpment, and Atlantic fracture zones in the mid-Atlantic ridge as well. And then thankfully, the vessel goes into shipyard for its normal maintenance period so that we can actually spend some time in the office to work up all the bloody data, because it's been frantic, yeah. So the Trans-Pacific Transect, this is all kind of fairly hot off the press. It only completed in January this year. But as I said earlier, we were taking advantage that as we are kind of traveling between some of the deep water areas, you know, we're ultra deep water areas, we're also crossing the abyssal plains. So we want to make sure that we're utilizing every moment, because the ship costs money regardless of whether it's doing science or just transiting. So we want to make sure it's optimized for science. So over that time, we did 6 legs. We collected enough data that's the equivalent in size to Japan. We did 123 lander deployments across 43 sites. So the sites are the stars, and at each star we did at least 3 lander deployments. And for legs 5 and 6, which are the 2 that are in the middle of each sort of east-west and north-south suite, legs 5 and 6, the submersible was back on board, so we were able to do a few submersible dives as well, but we didn't get as many as we wanted because the weather was a bit against us. And just to give a bit of a flavour for some of the data, is the other video going to work? It is indeed. We discovered underwater seamounts, which were previously unknown. The biologists sort of assure me that every time we kind of go to some of these areas, you know, we're going to see something new. This is, I love this guy, mainly because he's called a Bathysaurus, sort of in the top right. And I think anything called a Bathysaurus has got to be quite cool. It's an ambush predator, and it just sort of sits really nice and quietly on the sea floor. And then I don't really know what the dynamics is, but he just sort of puts up his fins and then suddenly just lifts off. I mean, I don't really know, given how slow he moves, you know, how he manages to eat. But anyway, he's an ambush predator. And I've been told by Alan Jameson that this was a new depth record for sort of finding this particular species of fish. And that was the very first lander deployment on leg 1. So we were sort of off to a good start. But thinking more about the sort of geology, we're seeing a lot of different, not only seascapes, so we're seeing that sort of seafloor spreading fabric, which we were anticipating or crossing this huge expanse of ocean crust. low sedimentation rates, so the sort of tectonic and the evolution of the seafloor is pretty much just sort of out there, ready for us all to see. The musician seamounts, they're pretty cool actually. You look them up on Wikipedia and they're all named after composers. So that's pretty cool. Fracture zones and such like, and we've started looking at not only the seafloor sediment composition across these vast areas, and we've got some of that work submitted and in review just now. But we're also sort of looking at the sort of geomorphology, and I'll maybe just sort of concentrate on the geomorphology at the moment. So in this particular sort of feature that we wanted to concentrate on was seamounts, actually. So why bother with seamounts? Well, they're one of the most abundant landforms on the planet, and as I've just sort of said previous slides ago, because of the lack of sort of high resolution data, sort of their morphology and their sort of morphometrics and their evolution have been quite hard to sort of get a grip on. They're known to affect, things like tsunamis, and they're also known as biodiversity hotspots as well. So there's quite a lot of interest in seamounts, but not a lot of high resolution data. And of course, the kind of hot topic of the moment, of course, well, of the moment, the last sort of 15 years or so, are the fact that a lot of these seamounts are known to host various crusts and nodule fields that are of economic interest to various organizations, shall we say. So why bother? As we were sort of talking about before, using satellite altimetry data, there was an update to the global database of known seamounts globally. And there's about 44,000 that were known globally. So if we superimpose, so that's the multitude of red dots on the far left, in the middle image, if we sort of superimpose where we went for the Trans-Pacific transect and sort of look at where the intersections are, according to sort of the global known database, there was about 222 seamounts coincident with that data set. So what we did is that we took our sort of Japan-sized multi-beam data set and we didn't manually interpret that because that would be soul destroying. That's a hell of a big area. And if we set some poor person to sit and delineate by hand all of these seamounts, they would go mad. So we, of course, started turning to automated and semi-automated techniques. And what we do is that we take that Japan-sized data set, we derive an awful lot of layers from that. So it's not just, your bathymetry, but you can start to look at seafloor rugosity, the curvature, the backscatter intensity return. So all of these other different layers that you can derive from that one data set, you then sort of normalize them and then sort of sum them all together. You stack them all together to produce sort of one data set, and then you start to run that through various programs that can aid and help us. So I'm not going to bore you with too much that sort of detail, but I suppose the take home is that rest assured, nobody went mad, and two, we're not out of a job, because regardless of how sophisticated a lot of these programs are, you're still going to need an expert or people that we work with to actually go and sense check all of these derived sort of automated routine. All of the outputs from that have to be checked. So that's an opportunity to not only just sort of go, well, okay, yeah, all of that looks good. This is all noise or, false pics. But it's also an opportunity to add in a bit of extra information. So do some of these seamounts have evidence of submarine landslides on their flanks? Do we see ridges on them? Are there craters on their surface? Have they got multiple peaks and stuff? So we can start to add in all of these extra layers of information, as well as using these different programs to sort of look at, the morphometrics, so deriving, what are the heights, how elliptical are they, all of these other sort of lovely pieces of information that we can then sort of use. So just some results in brief there. We can use all of that information, and instead of sort of just over 200 seamounts, we've actually found sort of 1,300 and odd seamounts. So that's already a sort of increase in our knowledge. And bearing in mind the sort of points in one of the previous slides there, that they're known biodiversity hotspots. Their seamounts are known to influence global circulation patterns of major ocean currents and the like. You know, their tsunamigenic potential. You know, there's lots of reasons why sort of having this sort of better handle on the distribution of some of these seamounts is why that's useful. We can also work with our partners. So instead of just sort of purely sort of thinking about the geology, and of course we've got some submersible transects up some of these seamounts as well. So we can start to look at the volcanic evolution of these edifices and start to piece together that sort of evolution side of things. But working with the ecologists and the biologists, we have a PhD student just now who's studying sponges. So looking at the different types of sponge communities that live on seamounts versus the abyssal plains round about, for example. We've found new species of octopus, which is in the lower sort of central area here. Nice little purple guy. We see lots of different sort of types of corals and things. And of course, we found an awful lot of polymetallic nodules as well, far more than what was previously known in terms of the extent of various nodule fields as well. So we've, yeah, there's an awful lot of work in progress that we're getting submitted just now. So after we completed Trans-Pacific Transit, we found ourselves round about sort of Tahiti and Fiji, which sounds lovely, but the sub-team were doing some training dives with their pilots and their team. So the scientists also went home for a month or so, but it was kind of, well, where to next? And we started to look at the Central Pacific Ocean. And back in 1964, Menard, so I'm loving online secondhand bookshops because you can get lovely old tomes like these and they're absolutely brilliant. And they still are like the most wonderful. So for the people online, I'm holding up some very dusty old books, which are cited on the slide that you can see at home. But they have, you know, seafloor images, and I love some of the descriptions for some of them as well. You know, it's cannonballs and potatoes of the nodules. You know, I love the descriptors that that these guys have used. But so this region of the Central Pacific was first described, I think, by Hess in 1948, and then by Menard in 1964, and we're looking at an area between the Line Islands and the Gilbert Islands. So that's the Republic of Kiribati, for those that maybe know. So we're looking north of Samoa. And Menard sort of quotes in his book, and please, after the talk, come up and have a look at some of these because they're gorgeous. Until recently, soundings have not been adequate to find fracture zones in the region between the Line and Gilbert Islands. But it now appears that at least 7 fracture zones exist in the Central Pacific. And the orange ellipse there, that's the Nova Canton Trough. And that was the one that, that back in 1964, they thought was probably up to about 7,000 meters water depth. Hazy and Hollister in Face of the Deep, they reported there were very few sort of points that they'd visited previous when the book was published, sorry. But the pink ellipsis there is something called the Samoan Passage. And that was described as a principal north-south passage for Antarctic bottom water, which lies east of the Manihiki Plateau, which is this sort of suite of shoals here. And it's one of 3 large igneous provinces in the area. But sorry, hang on, what am I trying to say? The Antarctic bottom water comes out of the Southern Ocean up the Tonga Trench, and it actually goes up and into the Pacific through the Samoan Passage and past the Nova Canton Trough. So it's interesting geologically. It's interesting from a biology point of view, just because nobody's ever looked there. And then the physical oceanographer that we've got leading a team there, she was very excited about the thought of trying to track the Antarctic bottom water through that passage and up into the Nova Canton Trough. So the Nova Canton Trough, first thought to be an abandoned spreading centre, but some recent studies have shown that it's a major fracture zone. And I mentioned the large igneous province round about Manihiki, but during the sort of Miocene times, during breakup of 3 big igneous provinces in the area, this sort of region is thought to be quite kind of key in that sort of period of history. So the Nova Canton Trough was initiated about 115 million years ago, but all activity had actually stopped by about 80 million years ago. But I know that when I first started working in these sort of areas, I'm like, God, look at all these sort of tectonic lineations and, it's a fracture zone and stuff like that. Surely it's actually quite an active sort of area. There's still quite a lot of activity in this region. So the Republic of Kiribati document, I think it's 0.1 earthquakes a year. So it's actually really, it's not much going on. It's not like the subduction zones where you're getting rumbles all the time. So what sort of major sort of geomorphological features are we looking at? We can see fracture zone sets that form these sort of V-shaped interactions. And I think what the take-home message is from some of these little inset images is that there's such a low sedimentation rate that the tectonic history is really just, it's preserved for all to see on the seafloor, which is really, really fantastic. Yeah, so the main sort of fracture zone set there, which comes, it sort of supports the theory that that it was a scissor-like opening of the feature. We've got tectonic lineaments that are preserved on the seafloor, and those bound sort of these seafloor spreading fabric, sort of little ridges in between that are sort of perpendicular to the transform faults. We've got submarine landslides that are a little bit hard to see in this image, but down this sort of flank here, all these sort of S's are all sort of major submarine landslides. There's about 30 of them just along this one sort of section. But we've also got abyssal hill fabrics that are preserved on the seafloor, sort of that are at an angle to the main sort of fracture zone. And we've got lots and lots of seamounts. And actually in the image in the middle there, which is from the Samoan Passage, we can see a lot of petite spot volcanism, so a lot of volcanic activity that is preserved on the seafloor. So thinking back to some of the automated routines that I was talking about, I'm actually doing the work in this area just now. There's no way I'm wasting years of my life hand-drawn little circles around all of these guys. So we use these sort of computer techniques and a bit of AI and stuff to help aid us in interpreting these areas. But what do some of these features look like when we actually go out and ground truth them and we start to look at them with our expert geological eyeballs? It's interesting flying from a sub. This is a picture, there's a little short video that I took from one of the dives. I'm diving with the pilot Luke there. And there are currents down there, so you've got to be kind of mindful. It can sort of push the submersible along and towards some of the rock outcrops. You're moving very slowly, but on the whole, submersibles and rocks shouldn't actually come into contact. That would be, a bad thing to happen. But we start to see this is a dive up one of these fault traces, but also up onto the seafloor spreading fabric that's cropping out in the seafloor. And as we might have expected, we see a lot of pillow basalts. We see a lot of stacked pillow basalt lava flows. We also see quite cool, I quite liked, is that the individual pillows actually erode and break out and they start to roll down the slope. And then in between all this sort of interstitial material are actually manganese nodules. So all the sort of flat areas, sort of at the base of the escarpment and then up on top as well, are these huge expanses of polymetallic nodules. And then they're also getting transported just downslope over time. But I just love this sort of juxtaposition of the sort of smaller polymetallic nodules and the pillows that are just eroding out of the lava faces. The actual floor of the deepest sort of points, which are about 8,000 meters of the Nova Canton Trough, is incredibly soft and full of these little white blobs that are swimming around called amphipods and snailfish who like to eat them. These are among the deepest fish in the world. And the floor of the Nova Canton Trough, in fact, there's some other pictures. Hang on, I'll zoom up these. The floor of the Nova Canton Trough is full of xenophyophores. So these are quite cryptic features. They're a type of foraminifera. They're incredibly hard to sample, and they've got lots of different forms as well, from sort of little sort of balls to sort of something that looks a bit more like a fan. But they're incredibly hard to sample because it's basically a very fine lattice that has trapped fine sediment in it, and you can't sample it. It just disappears, it just disintegrates. So all you have are photographs, and we talked to a couple of experts in the field, and they were like, oh, that's lovely. That's it. It's just, you know, it's like, oh, can't you tell us a bit more about xenophyophores? And they were like, not really. Yeah, that's a lovely data set though. It's like, okay. So these are just some images. So the bottom left there with the bright red sort of decapod, it looks like a deep sea prawn, and this sort of little fish. That's from about 2,500, 3,000 meters up on this ridge to the south here. And you can see the sort of pale color. We've got evidence of bottom current activity. We've got these seafloor ripples, but it's also the pale sort of color of the sediment. So we're above the carbonate compensation depth there. So it's carbonate rich sediments that we're finding on these sort of shallower ridge to the south here. To the north, we get a lot more of these manganese nodules, but also we get clay-rich, clay-dominated sediments. So we're at much deeper here. We're sitting at sort of 5,000 meters plus up on that sort of shallower plateau to the north. And then, of course, the white stars there, and there, we're starting to look at some of the rock formations. So I'll spend a couple of slides just looking at some of those now and presenting that. So something in some of the deepest parts. So these are dives to about 8,000 meters. So these are images from 2 dives to about 8,000 meters at the deepest points coming up these sort of fault escarpments here. And we start to see these sheeted dike complexes. So I think we're in this sort of this transition zone between the dikes and the lavas as well. So this is a sort of area between the sort of young, fresh sort of pillow basalts that you get associated with the seafloor spreading, and the sort of deeper gabbros that we don't ever sort of see cropping out at the seafloor here, but they have been sampled elsewhere through the International Ocean Discovery Program, for example. So they are the sort of lower and middle sort of crust sort of areas at depth. So this is a sort of transition zone between those sort of pillow basalts and the sort of deeper gabbros. And we've just got these sort of emplaced swarms of dikes. Each of those sort of sets here are about 1 meter in diameter, maybe slightly less. But you can also see the discontinuities sort of coming through that. So they're taking advantage of the weaknesses in the rock mass as well. And you can start to see some of the debris avalanche sort of failures at the base of some of these escarpments as well. And then working, this is Kate Wawatai, one of the other sort of pilots. Sort of again, sort of it's quite technical, quite difficult flying when you've got a very enthusiastic geologist sitting next to them going, oh, take us up that big cliff there, please, in a machine that, well, is maybe not best suited to flying in that sort of environment. Actually, it's a total lie. It's perfectly suitable to flying in that environment, but it's a bit difficult. Working with the biologists though as well, they start to look at what different sort of organisms are encrusting these beautiful dikes. The browny sort of yellowy sponges here, they're actually dead, and the brown and yellow colors are sediment that is just in the water column cascading down these massive underwater cliffs and just being captured in the dead lattice. So normally they would be these sort of bright white colors and these sort of purple colors. These orange boxes, these are carnivorous tunicates, which I had never heard of before, but the biologists are very, very excited about. And And I just think they look like sort of water balloons just kind of attached to the surface there. But on top of all of these sort of the sheeted dike complexes, which is, you know, what became apparent, is that we've got these stacked pillow basalts. So we did a number of dives to sort of look at different sections of these at different water depths and on different sort of features as well. And so we've effectively just come up a cliff that's sort of in the distance there. We've got Tim McDonald and myself in this sub here, sort of coming up and over to one of the landers that's sort of been sat for 10 hours on the seafloor doing its thing. So we can piece together all of the sort of static images and the static information that we're getting from the landers with the transects to sort of build up a picture of the geological evolution of the seafloor in this area. And that's sort of work in progress that we're doing just now. So we'll sort of skip away from sort of some of the sort of rocks to a sort of whistle-stop tour, the sort of things that we do see whenever we're down there as well. These are sort of some of the best of images from Nova Canton, but there's a wide variety of different types of fish that we see, and those are related to different sort of water depths as well. And we'll sort of talk about that. All of the sort of central panel are holothurians, so your sea cucumbers. It took me quite a while to realize that these things swim. So they're not just sort of sessile, they don't just sort of live and munch along on the seafloor. They actually sort of take off and they swim around as well to get from one good feeding ground to another. Lots of different types of sea stars. I've already talked about the sponges on the left there, and we've got the xenophyophores, and that's just to sort of give an idea for the different type of forms that the xenophyophores have. But as I said, they're quite cryptic and not a lot is known about them. So that's a little bit of a question mark just now. And lots of other sort of soft-bodied sort of species there. We do get some surprise visitors. So I was surprised looking through the footage when we saw this hooked Dana squid. Completely missed the bait that it was aiming for and go for the camera. But what, you know, as a quick little aside, so I was going through all the footage and I came across that, and I managed to keep it a secret from the entire ship. And I would give a daily sort of, you know, like, this is what we found the day before kind of talk to all the crew. And I managed to keep it a secret until that moment. And I had this sort of, oh, kind of gasp go up around the room, which was totally what I was wanting. But what is cool about this guy is that those big green headlights that you see, those are the biggest photophores. So they're bioluminescent. They're the biggest photophores known in the natural world. They're the size of lemons each. So, and there's a little bit of confusion. Are they used for courtship or attacking or to startle food? Well, I think it's used to startle food because I don't think it's trying to court our lander, but, you know, don't know. But this is at about 1,000 meters water depth in the Samoan Passage. So we see, because some of the areas that we're working in are above the carbonate compensation depth. So that's the depth at which carbonate, anything deeper than that, the carbonate will dissolve in seawater. So we get a lot of corals that are encrusting the bedrock cropping out on the seafloor, and also any sort of hard substrates. So some of these nodules, for example, or some of the pillows that are individual pillows that are eroding out and rolling downhill, you will quite frequently find corals. And if you get your eye in, you can start to see that there are animals that live, so they've crawled up the coral, that's a little squat lobster, to get above the seafloor into the water column so that they can start to capture nutrients from the seawater and the bottom currents going past. And again, just to sort of highlight that, we've got various sort of brittle stars and sea stars, also utilizing corals to do that. You see lots of different forms of coral and urchins and sea pens and eels. You get a lot of tube-dwelling anemones. Now, these come in multiple colors, but I quite like this sort of gothic one. And the laser pointers there are 20 centimeters apart. So, I mean, the tentacles on that guy are over 1/2 meter long, you know. So that's, I mean, whenever you're doing a sort of transect, and yes, you know, of course, you're interested in your own discipline, you know, so I'm going, oh, nodules and the basalts and the dikes and everything. And then it's like, actually, that's pretty cool when you come across that. Different types of British stars and sea stars, as I was saying, some fairly weird sort of things. So on some of Alan's dives in Nova Canton, we started finding these gouges, and they're all in a row. And so looking into the literature, we are suggesting that they're similar to other sort of whale feeding gouges that are found elsewhere. They've only been documented, I think, maybe a handful of times elsewhere. But we think that they're whale feeding gouges at about 3,000 meters water depth there. So that was a little bit weird. So that's been submitted already. We get these sort of hermit crabs with symbiotic organisms living on their back. Now, that has been sped up, that video has been sped up 10 times. So he's not normally that sprightly on the seafloor. He's sort of just cruising around, probably thinking that his back hurts as he's looking for food down there. A lot of something that the biologists and the ecologists are especially excited about is that using the submersible is that the resolution of the data that we're now getting on some of the communities down there is really quite spectacular. And even as a geologist, you know, I can look at that image and just be fairly sort of blown away by it. You do get quite a lot of fish, so this is pretty deep. So 3,000 to 5,000 meters, you get a variety of different types of fish. These are cutthroat eels. They're really angry, right? And the eels are so angry all the time. Whenever you come across them, they're always having a go. That poor decapod is losing its leg there. Yeah, the decapod gets away. Yeah, that eel's got his leg still. That's a bad day for the decapod. But is it something to note is actually there's a strong seafloor current there. So that's why all the eels are on one side of the lander footage there. And in other lander deployments at these water depths, you're seeing a lot of indicators of bottom current. So lots of ripples and sediment waves as well. And with the associated sorting that you would get with that process. I love this guy. I didn't realize that we would get squat lobsters of that size. This is over 3,000 meters water depth. Again, he's pretty slow moving. I didn't realize that they kind of swam like that, and he sort of does an epic fail before he gets going. Rather surprisingly, I think for some is that you do get fish quite deep, and these are bony fish. So you get your abyssal grenadiers, which are in the bottom left there. You get various types of cusk eels, which are the top two images there. Your cutthroat eels, as I said, and these are some of the laziest fish in the world. These are eel pouts, and they basically just come along and just veg out on the seafloor. I don't see them eat. They just kind of snooze. I don't really know what they do. You get corals quite deep, which is quite cool, and they quite often have anemones and such like sort of growing on them as well. You get the bony fish down to sort of 5,000 to 6,000 meters before they start to fade away, and it just gets too deep for them. More of the sea cucumbers and the hadal zone, which is all of the areas deeper than 6,000 meters water depth, was known as the kingdom of the holothurians. And these creatures, you get them all the way down to full ocean depth. You get them down in the bottom of the Mariana Trench. You get them down in Horizon Deep, which is in the Tonga Trench, which is the second deepest place in the world. So they really do sort of get everywhere. A lot of different types of sponges, which I've already sort of discussed. Other sort of surprise things. So this was one of the dives to look at the dikes and the lavas. And octopus at 6,000 meters just came and played in the viewport as we were sort of zooming along in the submersible. Crinoids, we get a lot of crinoids deep, sort of 6,000 to 7,000 meters. And again, you know, a lot of these sort of upright structures, they're used by other organisms to sort of elevate themselves above that sort of sediment water sort of boundary, sort of up where they can maybe perhaps get some better nutrients, more oxygenated water, for example. And when I sort of see crinoids, is that I can think back to my own undergraduate at Glasgow University and a field course that was led by Chris Burton, and it was way down to look at the Wenlock limestone, which was full of little sections of crinoid stems. And I have to admit my own ignorance that it wasn't until I started working in the marine environment some years later in the deeper marine environment that I realized that crinoids were still alive today. And so I really liked sort of seeing, you know, thinking back to that field trip back in my undergrad, learning about limestones down near Wales, and sort of being able to sort of see these creatures alive and sort of putting everything in a bit more sort of context. Snailfish, these sort of goofy looking guys. So they are interesting in that they're effectively made from gel, and they're also the deepest known fish. They go down to about 8,400 meters. And then no more fish beyond that, but you get lots of other different types of species. What is interesting is that shiny section there, that's its liver. And I think now, I hope I've got this right, forgive me if I've got any of my biology colleagues listening, but that sort of dark area behind, that's its stomach. And it is shielded in black because, of course, quite a lot of things bioluminesce. And so if you're made from gel, and if you shine a light through you, you can see all its organs, you don't really want to have something that if you eat something that bioluminesces, it's advertising where you are. So it's evolved to sort of be able to sort of shield its stomach so that it can sort of stay in disguise, regardless of what it eats. You get sea stars surprisingly deep, and of course the amphipods, so a lot of the crustaceans go all the way down to full ocean depth. So I'm conscious that I've been prattling on maybe a little bit too long, but just sort of finish off. God, did I spell that right? Oh yeah, maybe I did. Anyway, concluding thoughts. The deepest place in Earth are not out of sight, out of mind. And really, we have an incredible opportunity to use some of the most cutting-edge technology to look and explore not just the ultra-deep areas, but 54% of the planet is about 4,000 meters. So we're going to try and do it all. I mean, if you're going to quit BGS, you might as well have a huge unachievable goal to try and shoot for. So, but I think being able to do that under, using the landers, using the submersibles as well, under in situ scientific direction, like eyeballs on the ground is amazing. And at the scales that we're talking about, I mean, no one nation could fund this. Ongoing work, I mean, I hope I've managed to give you a flavour of all the different elements that we're sort of doing. I've probably covered too much and done nothing well, but, hopefully you've had some nice pictures along the way. But we're looking at the substrates, the geomorphology, the geohazards, and many other aspects, including working, looking at habitats and across different disciplines, across all of these deepest parts of our planet, from sort of 3,000–4,000 meters all the way down to full ocean depth. And really, I hope I've managed to sort of show that these deep areas, they're not, some sort of barren wasteland, but, they really are. They're interesting. They're some of the most active and diverse geohabitats, full of geodiversity, biodiversity, and it's a privilege to be able to work in some of these areas. So thanks very much.